We are continuing our study in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, I haven't brought this up maybe in a while, but when we look at the Gospel of Matthew, understand that the first generation of the church did not have the written Gospels. And there's probably a simple reason for that. We know that there were a number of people still alive well into, say, the generation after the death of Jesus. So the Gospels, they're probably written sometime after AD 60. Mark first, Matthew and Luke, and maybe John fourth. Dates vary because we do not actually know the actual dates. So we are looking at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, and we will be looking at verses 16 to 19. I will be reading from the New King James Version. But to what shall I liken this generation? And it's like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to their companions and saying, "We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We mourned to you, and you did not lament. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a wine-bibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, but wisdom is justified by her children." The reality is that the work done in ministry and done by the minister is often unappreciated. Read the Old Testament and the stories of many of the prophets, and you are confronted time and time again with unpopularity. What made their work so unpopular was that they were telling the truth. The message of the prophets can be boiled down to repent or else. The people in general ignored the pleading and the cries of the prophets. The great cataclysmal event known as the Babylonian captivity, that is 587 BCE, that is the sack or destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the removal of the ruling elite to the city of Babylon. The Babylonian captivity, that was the result of centuries of the prophets telling the people to turn back to God or else. The or else eventually happened. Churches and ministers soon become aware of what sells and what does not. It can be easy to fall into the trap of giving people what they want to hear, give them what will be tolerated and not what they need to hear. Look at what Jesus says in our passage. Jesus says that the message from God came to the people of his generation in two flavors. One was the austere and stern message of John the Baptist. John came embodying all the stereotypes of the Old Testament prophet. In a way, it is not all that surprising that people did not like the message. Then there is Jesus, who comes with a ministry that early on sets a very different tone. You see this very clearly in John chapter 2. Jesus and his first followers finds himself at a wedding in Cana of Galilee. And Jesus' mother is there when, surprise, surprise, the wine runs out in the party. And his mother turns to her son and says, "You know what? You need to do something." And Jesus begins by saying, "Well, it's not quite my time." And then Jesus decides to follow his mother's advice and turns the water into wine. I mean, it really sets a very different tone to the ministry of Jesus that now begins in earnest versus the ministry of John the Baptist. Churches, ministries, and ministers need to learn the truth that Jesus espouses in our present passage. To me, the point is that there is no way to make the message of the gospel palatable to all the masses. There are people who are attracted to the rugged and austere lifestyle. Think here of those who abandon the city and set up a homestead off grid in the wilderness. This is the minority position. The other side is to appeal to people's love of spectacle and parties and times of celebration and revelry. We can get people to the church in this way, but that does not mean that they will actually respond to the gospel message itself. You see, it is easy enough to get people to respond to the packaging, but what people need to do is to respond to the actual content. Churches and ministries can be guilty of thinking because people respond to the packaging, they're accepting the content. Jesus was pointing to the fact that the call of God and the response of the people to that call is never popular. It is never mainstream. Evangelicalism in North America all too often is guilty of trying to make the gospel popular and palatable. If you've ever owned a pet dog or cat, you know the problem with this approach. At some point, your pet needs some sort of medication. Think here of a pill. Now, you can talk to that animal all you want. Take your pill, it's good for you. The medication will make you well. Most dogs or cats do not respond. So, what you try to do is deceive that little critter. And what do? You stick it in maybe a treat or their food. And what does the dog or cat do? They eat the food and spit the pill out on the floor. That is all too often what happens. You have to do something to make them take that. Just putting it in a nice, attractive package does not mean they'll accept the content. Yes, we try to make the gospel appeal to where people are at, but do not confuse the packaging with the content. What we must have is people respond to God. And that might mean in the process of trying to get people to respond, that some people get good down and angry about God, the gospel, the faith, and the renouncing of the life of sin. We cannot avoid that. Jesus and John the Baptist knew this only too well.